Jeremy Kingsbury, aka Wetuwag, has a podcast where he studies the history of bagpiping and the spread of the instrument and the repertoire from the British Isles to North America. And I am going to make the argument that that podcast is a piece of anti-fascist media, amongst other things. But one of the things it is a piece of anti-fascist media. Matt DeBlas, who here on TikTok, he'll post videos of himself playing Irish folk songs on his Celtic harp and then immediately go and play an Indigo Girls song on the same harp and then go back to playing the Irish folk music. I'm going to make the pitch that that musical practice of mixing modern pop and old folk tunes together in a seamless fashion is a type of anti-fascist practice. My argument kind of stems from this observation that history without discomfort is a type of propaganda. History without criticism is a type of propaganda. Simplistic, oversimplified history is a type of propaganda. And particularly, especially, it's a type of fascist propaganda, because fascist ideologies always start off with this story of, well, this society, this country, this ethnic group, whatever, we used to be great and we need to make things great again. And things like Jeremy's podcast and Matt's repertoire choices, they actually complicate that story. They make it more difficult for the fascists to tell that story. I think a lot of people think the word anti-fascist has to mean counteraction. As in, you know, people are going to dress up all in black bloc and go throw soup cans at the police or something like that. There's types of anti-fascism that are counter-creation, right? Creation of alternative systems and narratives that just make the environment more hostile to the spread and growth of fascism. That's also anti-fascism. Jeremy's podcast spells out like a detailed and well-researched and nuanced and complicated cultural history of this just one cultural practice, right? This cultural practice of bagpiping. But by telling this accurate and nuanced and demonstrating how complex the past was, he's offering a counter-narrative to this idea that there was one monoculture in the great and glorious past, and that the great and glorious past was great and glorious. He's dispelling culture mystery myths, like dispelling myths about banned bagpipes and things like that. He's showing how varied cultural practice was 200, 150 years ago when it came to this music. He's showing how not all the musicians were on the same page. They all had different attitudes about what they should be playing and where they should be playing, which not only breaks up the story of monoculture, it also breaks up the illusion that some people have that there was only one way for the present to evolve. As in, if some other guy had won the argument about what was going to be the correct way to tune this instrument, or what is going to count as in and outside of standard repertoire, then people living today would have a completely different conceptualization of what our tradition even is. We talk about our traditions like they're some sort of essential core truth of our being. But once you get into the history, you realize they're not. They're just the accidental outcomes of 1,000 coin flips. Meaning what we have decided is and isn't traditional is kind of arbitrary and random. It didn't have to be the way it is. All of that can be helpful to the anti-fascist project. Work like Jeremy's dispels this idea that there used to be this great and glorious past. Work like Matt's dispels this idea of, and we need to get back to it. When Matt adds a little bit of Tom Waits into a Celtic performance, he's asking the audience to consider, is tradition the things that quote-unquote used to be? Or is tradition the things that always are, or the things that continue to be? Without saying anything, he's asking a question to the audience. He's asking the question, if our musical ancestors were able to time travel up to the year 2025, wouldn't they be disappointed if they saw that all we were doing was cosplaying as like our imagined version of who they were and playing the set of repertoire that they knew? Wouldn't they be disappointed to see that we had added nothing to the cultural repertoire? Bagpipes and Celtic harps do not need to be cosplay instruments. They do not need to be museum pieces that we just take out for a little educational display. They can be living and relevant parts of the right now culture. So if you are a practitioner or a fan of traditional music, folk music, root music, I kind of am going to like put the challenge to you to think about like, what is it that I am doing that I might not even be aware that I'm doing that is anti-fascist in my musical practice? Me, I just kind of notice it every once in a while, but I'm never like intentional with it. And it's one thing that I want to change about myself. I want to stop being a musician that accidentally does something sort of anti-fascist every once in a while and start being an anti-fascist who uses music as one of his tools for his anti-fascism. For example, I personally have started taking my tin whistles to old time and folk jams. And I don't make a deal out of it. I don't like tell people, oh, hey, just so everyone knows, I'm about to pull out a tin whistle. I just take it out like it's supposed to be there, and I'll play a little tin whistle over a Bob Dylan song or something like that. And I've never had anyone ever once say like, I don't know if I like that. Everyone just goes, oh, that's really cool. And even if that's a small thing, and even if that's kind of a niche thing, I still value it, because everyone in the room, myself included, is getting the opportunity to flex the muscle in the brain that fights against the concepts of there used to be this glorious past and that we need to get back to it. So here's my counter-fascist narrative. There is no such thing as the one great and glorious past. There is no such thing as the past, capital T, capital P. Right? It's no such thing as a monoculture, no such thing as everybody was on the same page about everything at any given time. And even if there was, there's no reason to be enslaved by it or beholden to it. That right there is my anti-fascist kind of mission statement. And even if I can just get people to entertain that idea for 1 second, like, that's a success for that day. So Matt says one of the reasons he wants to get a set of Highland pipes is to drown out counter-protesters at a Pride event, and I love this. This sounds very fun. But I want to use this comment as a jumping off point to go a little bit more in depth about this concept that I'm talking about of like folk music as an anti-fascist practice, because I think this idea works on like more levels than we are realizing. First off, let's define what I mean when I say the word fascism. Americans, we tend to use fascism as like a interchangeable synonym for the word authoritarianism. And I think there is a unique type of authoritarianism, let's call it fascism, that it's actually helpful to be able to pick out how it works in particular over other types of authoritarianism. Umberto Eco famously had those 14 characteristics of fascism, said any government that hits these 14 characteristics, let's call it fascist. I see Roger Griffin's definition pop up a lot. His definition is a fascist government is any type of paleogenetic form of populist ultranationalism, which... okay, Roger. But the YouTuber Ryan Chapman, last year he developed his own definition of fascism that I actually think is like better than all the rest. In a video essay he did last year, he came up with the definition of fascism as fascism is thinking with the national identity. Mussolini was trying to develop a government that was thinking with Italian blood, and the Mustache Man was trying to develop a government that fought with German blood. So if we go with that definition of fascism, how is rolling up with a bagpipe on a protester at a pride march a type of anti-fascism? On one level, sure, you're just drowning them out. You're erasing their opportunity to put out their fascist message. But if it were all about volume, we could achieve the same goal with a trumpet or with a loudspeaker just blasting music. Which brings me to the next level this scene works on. Bagpipes are coded in our culture specifically as a traditional instrument. Kilts are coded in our culture as a piece of traditional clothing. The anti-pride demonstrators, they symbolically lean on an association with traditional values, traditional religion, traditional culture as a source of their authority. So picture the scene. We got a bunch of losers yammering on about their traditional bona fides, holding their signs, screaming about traditional values and traditional culture and traditional beliefs. And here comes Matt, dressed in traditional clothes, playing a traditional instrument. You guys are just talking the talk. Matt over here, he's walking the walk. He spent the time to learn how to play the actual instrument itself. And Matt is making it known, even though he values traditional culture to the point that he likes to practice it in his personal life, he is not on board with these guys' message. It's undermining to the authority that they're trying to stand on for their homophobic talk. I mean, bonus points if those demonstrators think of themselves as like a Celtic type of person, right? Like a descendant of English, Scottish, Welsh, and Irish folks. But that doesn't need to be the case. I know in the definition that I'm posing for fascism, there's specifically a nationalism bent to it. But in this particular instance, like the nation that we are all rebelling against, or the nation who we are playing a game with the symbols of, is the past, like traditional culture, old time shit. It's similar to those videos you see every year of somebody dressed up like Jesus with a sign that says, "I never said that," or "I'm not with these guys," standing next to the crazy Christian protesters at a pride event. That guy dressed up like Jesus, he is communicating, I also accept the symbol of the Bible and the symbol of Jesus, but I am choosing to focus on the messages of love and acceptance, which hammers home to everybody that yes, the Bible continues to just be up to interpretation. So when somebody says, well, the Bible says just this one and only one thing, and it says that we should be upset about pride, you get to like put it in their face like, no, that's just your homophobia because you chose to interpret it in a homophobic way and you didn't have to. I got one more way that drowning out a homophobe with a bagpipe works on a symbolic level. Let's say you are the type of American for whom bagpipe is not necessarily coded as a traditional instrument, but when you hear the word bagpipe, you think of it as a funny instrument. Like for most Americans, bagpipe is one of like the canonical silly instruments, like right up there with accordions and banjos. So let's say that your core American national identity tells you that a bagpipe is something that you're supposed to laugh at. And you roll up on a scene of a bunch of evangelical Christians yelling about pride, and there's a dude blasting bagpipe in their face. You will laugh. Remember we were talking about guys dressed up like Jesus holding signs at pride events that say, I never said that, standing next to the evangelical homophobic preacher? Well, one time I saw a video, I don't know where the pride parade was, but the Jesus that showed up at that one, he was on a skateboard, and he was holding the sign and doing like circles around the preachers. The anti-pride demonstrators are trying to lean on traditional strength as their like basis of authority for why they're allowed to be in opposition to pride. Well, we already talked about how you can undermine their claim to tradition. We can also talk about how you're undermining their claim to strength by turning the whole scene into a circus, into something that's funny. Anyway, what I'm getting at here is because we are practitioners of traditional music, people see us as authorities or experts on traditional culture because we have some sort of claim to be using the symbolic language of this kind of national identity or traditional identities or traditional mindsets or traditional practice. And we can weaponize that authority to the symbolic language just as well as anybody else can. And we can weaponize it to do good. Matt DeBlas, who here on TikTok, he'll post videos of himself.
So the point that my buddy Dan, aka Protection Road, is making in that video is that when I am, for example, performing some Irish traditional music on the harp, and then I incorporate some, like a song by the Indigo Girls or Tom Waits, or even an original song or something, and then go back to the traditional and mix and match like that, it can be considered an anti-fascist practice. And you should watch the video because he explains it really well in more depth. But basically it's because it's a rebellion and it's against this idea in a lot of fascist rhetoric that there's some perfect, better past that this traditional music or traditional culture is tied to and must be kept pure. And that kind of idea of the past and purity are such a big part of fascist rhetoric that by kind of rebelling against it and, treating a musical tradition as an evolving and living thing, it is counter to that. And I never really thought about it that way, but I think he's absolutely right. And the other examples he gives are also very right in how that countering that pure past narrative. But I didn't really consciously think of it that way when I started mixing in more contemporary and other outside of the tradition music on the harp. One, I just thought it sounded cool, but also it was a definite pushback against this idea, which I think is less common among the people who actually play the instruments, because I know a lot of harpists who play all sorts of fun stuff, but in people's expectations of what we should be doing, like, oh, you play Celtic harp, you must play at Renaissance festivals, I sometimes do, and you must play this old music from the Middle Ages, and it must be like living in a castle. Like, no, it's an instrument, it can play all sorts of things. Not everything, but a guitar can't play everything, and a drum set can't play everything. But, I dislike this idea that an instrument can only be one thing. I do love traditional music, and I love history and that connection to singers, people who sang these songs in the past, but I do believe that it has to be, and to be really fun, it has to be part of something that's growing and evolving, and it's not isolated from the modern world. This kind of idea that because I play the harp, what I play must be in this sequestered off, isolated box of cosplay, as opposed to just part of the contemporary life and scene of music. So yeah, I could go on about this for hours and probably should stop now because I'm almost 3 minutes. But watch Dan's video. He's making some really good points.